Welcome to LexTalks, Legal Topics Simplified, the show that breaks down those complicated legal concepts and makes them, well, easy to understand.
Exactly.
So today,
Yeah.
we're going deep into judicial review.
Sounds good.
Now, it's a big one,
You can say that again.
especially for you,
Yes.
our Indian law students.
Absolutely.
So we're going to cover the meaning of judicial review,
Okay.
its position in the U.K., the U.S. and India, of course,
Of course.
and the grounds for judicial review.
All right.
So things like illegality, irrationality, I will talk about the Wednesbury Test,
Definitely have to discuss that.
procedural impropriety, and proportionality.
I think our listeners will find this fascinating.
Me too.
It really is.
Let's get ready to maybe rethink how power really works.
You know, it's true. That's what's so fascinating about judicial review.
Yeah.
It's like a check on power, you
Yeah.
know, making sure that everything the government does is
Wow.
actually in line with the law and with the Constitution. It's a key part of that whole balance of power in a democracy.
Okay, so let's just start with the basics.
Sure.
What is judicial review?
Yeah.
I was doing some reading,
Okay.
and it seems like it's the power of the courts
You okay?
to examine the decisions of public authorities,
Right.
like
Yeah.
government agencies
Uh-huh.
or officials,
Yeah.
and decide if those decisions are legal
Mm-hmm.
and if they're within the bounds of their power.
You got it.
Is that a good way of putting it?
You put it perfectly.
Okay.
That's a great way to sum it up.
Okay.
It's basically,
Yeah.
it's the judiciary saying to the government,
Right.
hold on a minute. Are you sure that you are operating within the rules here?
Right. So it's about
You know.
keeping things fair,
Yeah.
preventing the abuse of power.
Exactly.
Now, I know judicial review exists in lots of countries.
Yes,
But it works differently
it does.
in each place.
Absolutely.
You know,
Yeah.
You mentioned the UK, the U.S., and India. What are some of the key differences there?
You're right.
Yeah.
There are definitely some important distinctions.
Right.
Let's start with the UK.
Okay.
Okay, so they have a system of judicial review,
Okay.
but it's limited.
How so?
Well, they don't actually allow for a review of primary legislation.
What does that mean?
That means acts of parliament.
Okay.
Those are basically considered supreme.
Okay.
Parliamentary sovereignty reigns supreme there.
So in the UK,
Yeah,
once Parliament passes a law, it's basically set in stone.
pretty much.
No court can question it,
Right.
even if people think it's unjust
Yeah.
or goes against some sort of fundamental principle.
Well, that's essentially correct.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that the government can just do whatever they want.
Right.
The actions of officials
Yeah.
and public bodies can be challenged
Right.
if they go beyond the powers that Parliament has granted them.
So it's about finding that balance then
Exactly.
between respecting the decisions
Yeah.
of the elected parliament,
Uh-huh.
but also making sure that individuals aren't subjected to
Right.
arbitrary or unfair actions.
Yes, that's a good way to put it.
Okay. What about the U.S.?
The U.S.
They have a very strong tradition of judicial review, right?
They do, absolutely.
Yeah.
The U.S. system was established very early on.
Okay.
And what's really striking about it is
Yeah.
that they allow for the review of
That's right.
even the highest laws,
Yeah.
laws passed by Congress.
So even the acts of Congress
Yes.
can be scrutinized by the courts
That's right.
and potentially even struck down.
Exactly.
Wow. That's a really powerful check on legislative power.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a very strong system.
Okay. And what about that famous case, Marbury v. Madison?
Marbury v. Madison.
Was that the one that really solidified that
Yes.
power in the U.S.?
It did. It was a landmark decision
Right.
that really established the authority of the judiciary
Okay.
to review the constitutionality of laws.
So Marbury v. Madison,
Yeah.
every law student needs to know that one.
Absolutely a central case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's bring it back home to India.
All right.
Where do we stand on judicial review?
Well, India actually has
Yeah.
a really robust and dynamic system
Go.
of judicial review. It's
Okay.
really deeply rooted in
Yeah.
our Constitution,
Okay.
and it plays a vital role in safeguarding fundamental rights
Okay.
and making sure that the government
Yeah.
operates within those boundaries that are set by the Constitution.
So similar to the U.S.,
Yeah,
our courts have the power to strike down laws
they do.
passed by Parliament if they violate fundamental rights.
That's right.
Okay.
And it goes beyond just laws passed by Parliament.
Okay.
Judicial review in India also extends to actions
Right.
taken by the executive branch.
Okay.
So even the implementation of laws
Okay.
is subject to scrutiny
Okay.
and can be challenged if it's found to be unlawful or unconstitutional.
So that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
So we know judicial review exists.
Yes.
But on what grounds can you actually challenge a decision
Yeah, good question.
made by a public authority?
What are the legal reasons?
Yeah,
You can go to court and say, hey, this just isn't right.
exactly.
There are several grounds for judicial review,
Okay.
and they all really aim to prevent the misuse of power and ensure fairness.
Okay.
One of the most fundamental is illegality.
Illegality.
Yeah,
I
that
mean-
simply means that the authority in question
Okay.
did something they weren't authorized to do,
Okay.
exceeding the limits of their legal power.
So for instance,
Yeah,
if a local council decided to start running a bus service
okay.
when the law only permits them to operate tram lines,
Mm-hmm.
that would be a clear case of illegality.
Perfect example.
Okay.
That would be exceeding the scope of their powers.
Right.
And their actions could be challenged in court.
Right.
On the grounds of illegality.
Okay, so we have illegality.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to another ground.
Okay.
Irrationality.
Yeah.
Irrationality.
So we're talking about decisions that just don't make sense.
Exactly.
Seem completely illogical, bizarre.
Yeah, it means a decision is so unreasonable
Okay.
that no reasonable person acting within their authority
Okay.
would have arrived at it.
Okay. It's a high bar to clear.
Yeah, it's a tough one to prove.
I remember reading about a case
Oh, yeah.
where an air hostess was fired
Okay.
simply because she became pregnant.
Oh, wow.
That seems like a textbook example of irrationality.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That would very likely be considered irrational by a court.
What reasonable employer would do that?
It doesn't make sense. And thankfully, the courts often step in
Right.
to correct these blatant injustices.
Okay.
But proving irrationality
Yes.
is not always straightforward.
Okay.
There's a legal test
Okay.
called the Wednesbury Test,
Okay.
which is used to determine whether a decision
Right.
can be classified as irrational.
And we'll delve into the specifics of that test a little bit later.
The Wednesbury Test. Okay, I've got that noted.
Okay, good.
I've also come across
Yeah.
the term procedural impropriety
Procedural impropriety.
as a ground for judicial review.
Right.
What does that entail?
That focuses on the process
Okay.
by which a decision was made,
Okay.
rather than the substance of the decision itself.
Yes.
It asks whether the decision-making process was fair and just.
Right.
Were proper procedures followed?
Okay.
Were the parties involved
Right.
given a chance to be heard?
So if someone was accused of wrongdoing
Okay.
and punished
Uh-huh.
without a proper hearing or investigation,
Yeah.
that would be procedural impropriety.
Exactly.
Thank you.
That'd be a clear case of procedural impropriety.
And was that case Ridge v. Baldwin?
Yes. Ridge v. Baldwin.
Was that the one?
That's the classic case.
And that illustrates that.
That illustrates this principle perfectly.
Okay.
Involved a police chief who was dismissed without a fair hearing, and the court ruled that this violated the principles of natural justice,
Right.
which are fundamental to a fair process.
Ridge v. Baldwin. Got it.
Good.
So we've got illegality,
Yeah.
irrationality,
Uh-huh.
and procedural impropriety
Right.
as grounds for judicial review.
So far.
Are there any others?
Yes.
Okay.
There's one more that's become increasingly important,
Okay.
especially when it comes to matters impacting fundamental rights.
Okay.
Proportionality.
Proportionality.
Yeah. Okay.
Have you heard that one before?
I've heard it before, but
Right.
could you explain it in the context of judicial review?
Of course.
Yeah.
Proportionality examines
Okay.
whether the action taken by a public authority
Right.
was proportionate
Okay.
to the objective it was trying to achieve.
Okay.
So, was the punishment fitting for the crime?
Okay.
Was the action taken too restrictive?
Right.
Even if it was done with good intentions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, I'm trying to think of a good example.
I recall that case.
Okay.
I believe it was the Sardar Singh case
Uh-huh.
involving an army Jawan
Yeah.
who received a harsh punishment for having just a few extra bottles of rum.
Yeah, that's a great example.
Would that be a situation where proportionality comes into play?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
In that case,
Yeah.
the court decided that the punishment was disproportionate to the offense.
Right.
So proportionality is particularly relevant
Okay.
when you're dealing with cases that involve fundamental rights.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
it ensures that the government doesn't resort to
Right.
excessively harsh or intrusive measures,
Yeah.
even when they're pursuing a legitimate goal.
It's like saying,
Right.
okay, you had a reason to take action,
Yeah,
but did you need to go that far?
that's a good way to put it.
Right. Were there less restrictive ways to achieve the same objective?
Exactly. It's about striking a balance
Right.
between the need for government action and protecting individual rights.
Okay.
So what's interesting about judicial review in India
Okay.
is that it's constantly evolving.
Okay.
The concept of reasonableness
Yeah.
has gone beyond just the rigid Wednesbury Test.
Okay.
And courts are now considering the context of each case more carefully.
Okay.
So they recognize that
Yeah.
what might be reasonable in one situation
Right.
might not be so in another.
Okay. So it's not just about mechanically applying a test.
Right.
You have to look at the bigger picture.
You have to look at the whole picture.
And the nuances of the case.
Exactly.
So that sounds pretty complex.
It can be.
Yeah.
And it requires, a deep understanding of the law, the Constitution,
Right.
and a really thoughtful approach
Yeah.
to applying those principles to real-world situations.
Okay. And what about that doctrine of proportionality?
Yes, the doctrine of
We
proportionality.
talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
It's gaining traction in India as well.
It is. It often
A more nuanced way of reviewing these administrative actions,
Okay.
particularly when those actions might infringe upon fundamental rights.
Proportionality as a shield
Yes.
for our fundamental rights.
That's a powerful way to think about it.
It shows that our legal system
Yeah.
is adaptable, right?
I've
And
wa-
responsive to new challenges.
That's what's so great about it.
Oh.
It's constantly changing.
So judicial review sounds like a really vital tool
It is.
for citizens to hold the government accountable.
Absolutely.
But how effective is it in practice?
That's the question.
Right? What are the real-world implications of all these legal principles?
It's a great question,
Yeah.
and one that deserves a deep dive of its own.
Okay.
We should definitely explore that further.
Okay, so we've laid the groundwork.
Yes.
We've explored what judicial review is,
Uh-huh.
how it operates in different countries,
Yep.
the various grounds on which it can be invoked.
And even touched on some of the key cases.
Good.
Now,
Okay.
let's turn our attention to how it functions
Right.
within the specific context of India.
Sounds good.
What are the unique challenges
Okay.
it faces here?
All right.
What are some of the landmark cases
Good.
that have shaped its development
Yeah,
and application in India?
that's a great place to start.
So we've laid the groundwork, exploring what judicial review is
Yeah.
and how it works in different countries.
Yeah.
Now, let's focus on India. What are some landmark Indian cases that have shaped how we understand judicial review here? Cases that every Indian law student should know.
Oh, there's so many fascinating cases.
Yeah.
Let's start with one that's considered a cornerstone. A.K. Gopalan v. State of Madras.
Okay.
This 1950 case, one of the first times the Supreme Court really had to grapple with
Okay.
the scope of fundamental rights and the power of judicial review in independent India.
So right after India became a republic, the courts were already,
Yeah.
defining the boundaries between
Exactly.
individual liberty
Yeah.
and the power of the state.
Right from the beginning.
Wow.
The Gopalan case involved a challenge
Okay.
to the Preventative Detention Act.
Okay.
And the court's decision
Yeah.
really helped shape the early understanding of judicial review in India.
Okay.
Then fast forward to the 1970s, and we have Kesavananda Faradi v. State of Kerala,
Okay.
arguably one of the most important cases in Indian legal history.
Kesavananda Faradi.
Yeah.
The case that gave us the basic structure doctrine,
Yeah,
right?
you got it.
The idea that even Parliament can't change certain core principles of the Constitution.
Exactly. It was a groundbreaking judgment.
Okay.
And it significantly strengthened the power of judicial review in India.
Okay.
The court basically said that while Parliament has broad powers
Okay.
to amend the Constitution,
Right.
it can't alter the basic structure that underpins our democracy and our fundamental rights.
That's a powerful check on Parliament's power.
It is. It really is.
Okay, so Gopalan sets the stage. Kesavananda Faradi raises the stakes.
Yeah, good way to put it.
What other pivotal cases have shaped judicial review in India?
Well, there's Maneka Gandhi v. Union of India.
Okay.
This 1978 judgment
Correct.
really broadened our understanding of Article 21, which guarantees the right to life and personal liberty.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
court basically said
Yeah.
this right isn't just about, physical existence.
Okay.
It encompasses
Yeah.
a much wider range of freedoms and protections,
Okay.
including the right to travel abroad.
So before Maneka Gandhi,
Yeah,
Article 21 was seen in a more limited way.
it was much more limited.
Okay.
But this judgment expanded it to include things like personal autonomy and dignity.
Okay, interesting.
It was a turning point,
Yeah.
solidifying the principle that any deprivation of life or personal liberty
Yeah.
must be just fair and reasonable.
Wow, that's big.
It is.
What kind of consequences did that have?
It's had a far-reaching consequences, leading to the recognition of various rights, from the right to a clean environment to the right to privacy.
It's incredible how one case can have
I know, it's amazing.
such a ripple effect,
It's true.
changing how we interpret fundamental rights
Absolutely.
and really expanding their scope.
It's remarkable.
How did this impact the concept of judicial review specifically?
Well, the Maneka Gandhi case,
Yeah.
along with others, helped establish the concept of due process of law in India.
Due process, okay.
And this means that when reviewing a law
Okay.
or executive action,
Yeah.
the courts look not only at the substance,
Okay.
but also at whether it was enacted
Okay.
or implemented fairly and justly.
So it's not just about the what,
Right.
but also the how.
Got it.
The process matters just as much as the outcome.
Exactly.
And that's a crucial aspect of judicial review.
It is, absolutely.
It's about preventing arbitrariness and making sure the government acts responsibly,
Right.
not just within its powers, but also in a fair and just manner.
That's the key.
So we've got these landmark cases
Yeah.
establishing, important principles.
Right.
But judicial review isn't just about
No.
big historical judgments.
It's not just about the past.
Right,
It's a living, breathing part of our legal system.
right. It's happening right now.
Exactly.
It's constantly being used
all the
to
time.
address specific issues and challenges.
Yep.
What are some contemporary examples?
Oh, there are so many
Yeah.
of how judicial review is applied in India today.
Okay.
Well, for instance, think about the recent debates about environmental regulations.
Okay.
Courts have used judicial review to really scrutinize government policies,
Okay.
ensuring that they balance economic development
Right.
with environmental protection.
It's a tough balance.
It is a tough balance.
Okay.
They've also played a role in safeguarding
The rights of marginalized communities, often stepping in when these rights are threatened or ignored.
So judicial review is actively being used
It is. It's an active tool.
to address
Yes.
current social and political issues,
Absolutely.
ensuring that government actions are aligned with
Yeah.
constitutional principles and fundamental rights,
That's right.
even in complex and evolving areas like environmental law or social justice.
Exactly. It's a dynamic tool
Yeah.
that helps adapt our legal framework to new challenges.
And it's constantly being tested
It is.
and refined
all the time.
as new situations arise.
That's the beauty of it.
It sounds like judicial review is such a vital part of our democracy.
It really is.
But
And
as with any powerful tool,
Yes.
there must be limitations and potential drawbacks.
You raise a crucial point.
Yeah.
We've seen how
Yeah.
important judicial review is,
Right.
but it's not a perfect solution.
Okay.
There are concerns about its scope.
Yeah.
Its potential for overuse
Okay.
and the delicate balance that it requires within our democratic system.
So we've established that judicial review is like a cornerstone of the Indian legal system,
It really is.
a powerful tool
Yeah.
for making sure the government acts lawfully and respects our rights.
Absolutely.
But like with any powerful tool,
Yeah.
there are limitations and challenges.
Right.
Let's dive into those a bit.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to understand that while judicial review is a powerful instrument for upholding the rule of law,
Yeah.
it's not without its boundaries.
Right.
One key limitation is the concept of justiciability.
Justiciability.
Yeah,
So there are certain things the courts just won't get involved in.
exactly.
What kind of issues would fall into that category?
Good question. Matters that are considered highly political
Okay.
or those that involve complex policy decisions
Yeah.
are often deemed non-justiciable.
Okay.
For instance, the courts are unlikely to intervene in matters related to foreign policy,
Okay.
national security,
Right.
or the allocation of budgetary resources.
Makes sense.
Those are areas
Yeah.
where the expertise and accountability lie with the elected branches of government, the
Right.
legislature, and the executive.
So the courts are recognizing that they're not equipped
Right.
to make decisions
Yeah.
on these really complex matters.
It's not their area of expertise.
Yeah.
Their role is primarily to interpret and apply the law,
Right.
not to formulate policy.
It's about respecting that separation of powers,
Exactly.
recognizing the limitations of the judicial role.
It's not about the courts running the country.
Right.
It's about making sure that the government operates within the legal framework.
Okay. That makes sense.
Another important limitation is the doctrine of standing.
Standing.
Yeah. In order to challenge an action in court,
Yeah.
a person has to have a sufficient interest in the matter. They need to show that they've been personally affected
Oh, okay.
or that their rights have been violated.
So I can't just walk into court
No.
and challenge a law or a government policy.
Not just because you disagree with it.
Yeah, just because I disagree with it.
You need to show it's actually impacted you in
Right.
some way.
Right.
That's the general principle.
Okay.
The idea is to prevent frivolous lawsuits
Right.
and make sure that judicial resources are used efficiently
Oh,
to address real and substantial harms.
it wouldn't be practical for the courts
No, not at all.
to entertain every grievance or challenge that anyone might have.
Especially in a country as large and diverse as India.
Right, exactly.
And even if a court finds that an action is unlawful,
Yeah.
its power to provide a remedy isn't unlimited.
So
There are limitations on what the courts can actually do to redress a wrong.
even if the court says, hey, the government did something wrong,
Right.
they can't just fix everything.
It's not a magic wand. They have to consider
Yeah.
the practicality and the appropriateness of the remedies available.
So what kind of remedies are there?
Well, they might quash an unlawful decision.
Okay.
They could issue a direction to the government
Right.
to reconsider a matter. Or they might award compensation to an aggrieved party.
Okay.
But they can't,
Right.
just step into the shoes of the executive branch.
Right. Start making policy.
Exactly.
They have to work within the system.
It's about finding the most appropriate and effective solution
Right.
within the confines of the law.
Respecting those different roles in
Yeah.
the government.
Recognizing the courts have a specific function
Yeah.
within that system.
And sometimes finding that balance
Oh, absolutely.
can be tough.
It can be very challenging.
Right.
The courts have to weigh all sorts of factors,
Yeah.
the nature of the violation, the public interest,
Right.
the potential consequences of their decision.
It's not always black and white.
It's very rarely black and white.
Yeah, those judges have to make some really tough calls sometimes,
Definitely.
especially when there are competing interests
Uh-huh.
and complex legal principles at play,
It's a lot to consider.
right?
They have to think about precedent.
Yeah.
They have to interpret the Constitution, apply these concepts to real-world situations
Why?
that often have far-reaching implications.
And they have to get it right.
They do. They have a big responsibility.
Now, speaking of challenges,
Yeah.
judicial review in India has faced its fair share of criticism
It has.
in recent years,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Some people argue that the courts have become too interventionist,
Right.
overstepping their boundaries,
Yeah.
encroaching on the domain
Uh-huh.
of the other branches of government.
There's that debate about judicial activism.
Yeah, judicial activism, we hear that a lot.
That's been a hot topic for a while now.
So the concern is that judges
Yeah.
might be imposing their own values or preferences
Mm-hmm.
on policy matters.
Instead of just interpreting the law.
Right, exceeding their mandate
Yeah.
and stepping into that realm of policymaking.
Which is really the role of elected officials.
Right.
It raises questions about accountability.
Right.
And the will of the people.
It's a tough one.
It's a delicate balance.
Right.
Yeah.
On one hand,
Uh-huh.
we want the courts to be strong,
Of course.
independent guardians of our rights.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
we don't want them to become
Right.
unelected lawmakers.
I don't want them to overstep.
Right, we want that balance.
Yeah.
So where does all this leave us
That's the big question.
as law students, as citizens?
Yeah.
What should we take away
It's a lot to think about.
from this deep dive
Yeah.
in a judicial review?
What are the key takeaways?
What should we keep in mind as we continue our studies and maybe become
Yeah, as you move forward in your legal career.
lawyers, judges, or just,
Or even just engaged citizens.
engaged citizens?
It's important for everyone to understand.
Yeah.
I think the most important takeaway
Yeah.
is that judicial review is an essential pillar of
So-
our democracy.
Okay.
It's a powerful tool for upholding the rule of law,
Yes.
protecting fundamental rights,
Mm-hmm.
ensuring the government acts within the bounds of the Constitution.
It's about accountability, right?
Absolutely.
Transparency,
Yeah.
making sure that everyone
Everyone, even those in power,
with this power,
is subject to the law.
right.
No one is above the law.
It's a reminder that the Constitution is supreme.
The supreme law of the land.
Yeah. And that the courts are there
They're the guardians,
to protect it.
protecting its principles.
Right. And to make sure that its guarantees
Yeah.
are real
Enforceable
and enforceable.
in practice.
But it's also crucial to remember
Right. It's not perfect.
that judicial review is not a silver bullet.
It has limitations.
It has limitations.
In terms of its scope and its remedies.
Right.
And it's subject to
Yeah.
ongoing debate and interpretation as new challenges arise.
As society changes.
As society evolves.
It's about using this tool
responsibly and thoughtfully.
recognizing its limitations,
Right.
but also appreciating
Yeah,
its vital role in protecting our rights,
absolutely.
ensuring the government operates within that framework of law and accountability.
That's what it's all about.
Well said. And as future lawyers and engaged citizens,
Yeah.
it's our responsibility to engage with these debates
Critically,
and thoughtfully.
to understand the power and the limits of judicial review
Okay?
and advocate for its responsible and effective use
Yeah.
in safeguarding our rights and upholding those values of our Constitution.
Well said. That's a great note to end on.
It's been a great discussion.
Judicial review is such a dynamic and fascinating aspect of Indian law.
it really
It's
is.
one that will continue to shape
Yeah.
our legal landscape and our democracy
Absolutely.
as a whole.
For years to come.
Thanks for being part of the LexTalks.
It's been my pleasure.
Subscribe and keep learning.